Bishop Summit. Many Catholic faithful are frustrated after church leaders end their annual meeting with no plan to fight abuse. Italy's plan. Bishops in the Catholic country announce steps to handle allegations of misconduct. We're at the Vatican. Murder mystery. Saudi Arabia's top prosecutor is recommending the death penalty for 5 suspects in the killing of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. How the U.S. is reacting. And Castle on the Square. How sand will star at the Vatican this Christmas. On EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, November 15th, 2018. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Catholics are lashing out at U.S. bishops as they end their fall conference. Chief among the complaints is that when it came to discussing clergy sex abuse issues with bishops, lay Catholics' input was met with personal and planned opposition. Today, one group, simply called Catholic Laity, wants a say in selecting a new Archbishop of Washington to replace recently resigned Cardinal Donald Wuerl.
It has been sad, especially as a young woman, to watch Catholics leave the church because of the lack of trust that has formed between the laity and the clergy. We urge you, our brothers and sisters, not to leave the church. We need your voice to help make Mother Church stronger.
The group gathered at the Basilica of the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception in Washington because they say of its symbolic nature for the Church universal. One young bishop is defending his brothers, saying they will not let this issue go.
Bishops are supposed to live the gospel, and that is to live according to the morality that Jesus promotes for us, and bishops failed to do that, right? They failed to act with integrity at various times.
Andrew Cozzens is an auxiliary bishop in St. Paul, Minneapolis, and he says bishops should be held accountable. Cozzens says at the heart of the matter is the need for interior conversion. Bishop Andrew Cozzens of the Archdiocese of St. Paul in Minneapolis joins us now from Baltimore. Welcome to the program. Many Catholics are saying they are bewildered, angered, demoralized by the inaction of the bishops. What is your response to them?
You know, I would say that many of the bishops share the feeling of bewilderment and demoralization because of what happened this week in certain ways. I think also, though, the bishops feel a sense of hope. And I think that hope comes from the fact that the bishops seem united about very clear aspects of how we need to move forward. So my experience is, though, even though we weren't allowed to vote, and that was a painful thing, there is firm resolve by the bishops to be able to move forward based on the principles that we established in our proposals, and principles which are going to be broadly supported by the people of God.
Okay, so then why, when it came time to take a vote on asking the Vatican to release documents quickly about Theodore McCarrick, who was accused, allegedly, of sexual abuse, did the bishops vote it down?
I think because the way the amendment was stated, didn't seem to be asking for much more than was already promised by the Vatican. So, the statement was read from the Holy Father's office on October 6th, which stated that he plans, in fact, to release documents. He plans, in fact, to do an investigation, and he said, even if that leads us to things that we're not happy to see, we're going to make that known.
So I'm going to quibble with you here. Hang on one second. I'm going to quibble with you. It says,
sure.
The amendment right here says, encourage the Holy See to release soon. I think that's the key. Many Catholics want action, and yep. You couldn't even pass something that said, hey, Holy Father, please give us this information soon.
First off, it didn't go down unanimously, so a lot of bishops did vote for the motion.
Right, 60%
secondly,
voted against. You're right.
The sense was, I think the sense was that the Vatican, the bishops who voted in favor of the motion or against the motion had the sense that the Vatican is in fact going to do this investigation and release the documents. And so we were asking for something that implied we didn't trust the Holy Father or something like that. And of course, bishops don't want to imply that they don't trust the Holy Father.
Of course. All right. So all of this said, you've got people complaining you didn't do anything. Some people are saying it's because of the Vatican. They're saying you didn't write anything about McCarrick because we didn't want to insult the Pope. So what are you going to tell your flock when you get back to St. Paul, Minneapolis?
I'm going to tell them that although we didn't get as far as I had hoped that we would get this week, that I had strong desires for what I think we need to do in terms of answering some of the issues that led to the situation with Cardinal McCarrick and others, that we actually did get a chance for a lot of bishops to express their firm resolve and their unity around these issues, and that hopefully what we did this week will be part of a broader solution. And this is not the end of the story.
Bishop Andrew Cozzens, Archdiocese of St. Paul and Minneapolis, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Please pray for us.
Disgruntled House Democrats say they have the votes to stop Nancy Pelosi from becoming the next House Speaker. Pelosi shrugs off the lack of support.
It doesn't matter to me whether they support me. What matters is that they support a democratic agenda to make progress for America's working families.
If our party responds by reinstalling the same status quo leadership we've had since 2006, then we're failing the American people and we're letting down the Democratic Party.
Democrats looking to block Pelosi say it's time to give younger Democrats a chance at high-level posts. Pelosi was Speaker before Republicans took House control in 2011. Saudi Arabia's top prosecutor is seeking the death penalty for 5 suspects in connection to the killing of Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi. And the U.S. Treasury Department announces it's imposing sanctions on 17 Saudi officials. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby reports from the State Department. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says he wants transparency and accountability from the Saudi government. Pompeo says he told the Saudi Crown Prince the State Department will look at all of the information the country is releasing about Khashoggi's death. The Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, remains at the center of a global outcry. Saudi Arabia's chief prosecutor announcing a total of 11 people have been charged in connection with Khashoggi's death. He says the 5 people facing capital punishment were directly involved in, quote, ordering and executing the crime. The prosecution appears to be distancing the killers with the Crown Prince, who has significant decision-making powers in his country. Instead, they claim a former Saudi deputy intelligence chief formed a 15-person team to try to force the journalist back to his native Saudi Arabia. On October 2nd, the 59-year-old entered the Saudi consulate in Istanbul and never came out.
The method of murder is as follows: a quarrel, a fight, tying up the victim, and injecting him with an overdose of a sedative that led to his death. We have identified the person who ordered the murder and those who performed it. They are 5 people whose confessions matched.
Turkey's foreign minister has called for an international investigation and says all 21 suspects detained in Saudi Arabia should be put on trial in Turkey. The brutal death of Khashoggi, a Washington Post columnist who had been critical of the Crown Prince, sent shockwaves around the world last month. Many believe an operation of this magnitude could not have been carried out without the prince's knowledge. Today, while at a conference in Singapore, Vice President Mike Pence said it's important the U.S. government stand with Khashoggi's supporters.
Whether it be the murder of Jamal Khashoggi in Turkey, we'll continue to condemn actions against a free and independent press.
Saudi prosecutors claim the suspects who carried out the attack on Khashoggi saw him as a threat because of his work as a writer and possible support by countries hostile to Saudi Arabia. That's different from the kingdom's original claim. In October, the Saudis originally denied any knowledge of the journalist's death before admitting a group of rogue operators were responsible. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby reporting from the State Department. Thank you, Wyatt. Bangladesh cancels its offer to send Rohingya Muslims back home. Officials say they found no one from the minority group who wanted to return to their native Myanmar, despite the offer of food and transportation. More than 700,000 Rohingya fled their homeland last year following a crackdown by security forces. South Korea dismantles 10 guard posts at its border with North Korea. The dramatic scene highlights the rivals' efforts to reduce animosity. Last week, the two countries removed troops and firearms from the demilitarized zone. An Italian priest who says Pope Francis is the anti-pope has been excommunicated. Father Alessandro Minutella also says he communicated with angels, saints, and the Blessed Virgin. He has been dismissed for spreading heresy and schism. Church leaders in Italy announce new measures to address clergy sex abuse.
È una piaga gravissima.
The president of the Italian Bishops' Conference spoke to the media today. There's hope the new guidelines will usher in a new era of transparency about clerical sex abuse in the country. Vatican correspondent Juliette Lindley joins us from Rome. Juliette, Italian bishops have been largely silent on this issue. What are they saying now?
Lauren, I just put down the phone. I was talking to Cardinal Gualtiero Bassetti, and he says that the creation of a national advisory group of lay and religious experts is absolutely a priority. Bassetti saying that it's in line with what the Holy Father wants, and he tells me the Pope wanted Italy to follow measures that are being taken in other countries. The Cardinal says we're talking about atrocities against innocent children. Now, the goal of the advisory board is to help church leaders educate personnel about protecting children. And another key component is helping bishops investigate abuse reports. Now, clergy sex abuse is an issue that has not been in the spotlight in Italy, Lauren. And so this is a big step for a group that hasn't really been making combating sex abuse a priority.
Unlike here in the U.S., where many people are disappointed in what the bishops have and have not done, rather. So what have the bishops done in Italy in the past?
Well, Italy's bishops are behind their counterparts in some Western countries in confronting the sex abuse issue, and they first published guidelines in 2014, which made clear that bishops were under no obligation to report crimes to police. Now, as we've reported before, Pope Francis has summoned bishops from around the world to a summit in February 2019, on abuse prevention. Expectations will be high, and after the Vatican stopped the U.S. bishops from taking action, many Catholics will be watching that summit very closely. Now, Cardinal Bassetti tells me the Italian Advisory Board ties in well with this upcoming summit, and he says the Italian bishops will be working closely in the fight against abuse with the Vatican's Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. Lauren.
Juliette Lindley, EWTN News Nightly Vatican correspondent. Thank you.
Thank you.
The Catholic bishops in France say they have made progress in setting up an independent commission to investigate clergy abuse, similar to the one being started in Italy. The announcement comes following their annual meeting last week in Lourdes. The probe would start with cases in 1950. The Holy Father met with Israeli President Reuven Rivlin this morning at the Vatican. The Pope says a dialogue between Jews and Christians and Muslims is crucial in order to guarantee a peaceful coexistence in the Middle East. Rivlin gave the Holy Father a sculpture made by an Israeli art school showing the old city of Jerusalem divided into 3 areas, and Francis gave a medallion showing the desert and springs of wheat, saying deserts of enmity can turn into a grain of friendship. An independent government panel is investigating claims of sex abuse against 4 priests in the Archdiocese of Birmingham, England. Among those named, Father John Tolkien, the son of author J.R.R. Tolkien. Father John died in 2003. And for more on this story, including a look at the allegations against him, visit our partners at CatholicNewsAgency.com. Coming up, we sit down with the head of USAID talking about faith-based groups and their role in improving education around the world. The United States Agency for International Development announces a new initiative for global education. The group says 303 million children and young adults between the ages of 5 and 17 are not in school, and more than 617 million do not meet minimum standards for reading or math. Joining me now is the administrator for the U.S. Agency for International Development, Mark Green. Welcome back to the program.
It's great to be with you.
Really great to have you. This is personal for you. This initiative is part of your past. Tell us.
So 30 years ago, a long time ago, when I started off on all this, my wife and I were teachers at a school in Kenya. It was a Quaker school that we were at. And we saw how desperate kids were to get what would be a pale shadow of the education that I think we take for granted here. And so it was a wonderful opportunity to help marginalized kids, kids who would otherwise be entirely left behind, give them some of the skills that they would need to be able to compete and to be successful. Their passion is what drives me. If I can harness any of that, then we'll be successful.
The numbers of kids who are not educated, staggering. 1 in every 5 are out of school. So how is USAID collaborating with organizations around the world, in particular faith-based organizations, to change that number?
It's reaching into those marginalized communities where kids don't have meaningful access to education. Sadly, in the world today, so much of it's displaced. So you have so many kids who are displaced. They're in camps or they're on the move. And so how do we reach them? And very often it's working with non-traditional schools or faith-based schools and institutions who are oftentimes working in these areas. And so they're able to deliver some semblance of an education.
So the goal is to give them money to continue to do that. Let me give you another statistic that was in your report. 69 million new teachers are needed by 2030 to get primary and secondary education to these children who do not have that. So why is this investment right now so critical to USAID?
No country can be self-reliant. No country can have sustainable growth if it doesn't have an educated workforce, if it doesn't have educated mothers who can make those right choices for their families. So it really is the key to everything else that we do.
One could make the argument that it is also helpful on the national security level and on foreign policy levels. How so?
Well, so first off, in too many parts of the world, we see segments, communities that are left out. And we were talking off the air, but you have, for example, young Rohingya kids in Burma who haven't been able to go to school, get an education for 5 or 6 years. I don't think that they're radicalized. They will be if that continues on. If they don't have access to a meaningful educational opportunity so they gain the tools for the future, we have to reach out and be able to provide some hope, some semblance of education.
In places of conflict, severe conflict, what's the biggest challenge to guaranteeing that this program is going to work?
Well, there are no guarantees, of course, in conflict settings, but children in crisis and conflict is what I worry about more than anything else in the world. I'm often asked, what gets you up in the middle of the night? This is what gets me up in the middle of the night. Children being born in displaced settings and therefore having no hope for the future. So we have to find unconventional ways. Technology is our friend. There are ways of working with technology to help deliver, but it's working with often mission-driven organizations, many of them faith-based, some of them not, but whatever it takes to be able to reach and provide some access to education so those kids can begin to realize their abilities, but also have some hope. When people don't have any hope at all, that's when you begin to get the problems that we're talking about. That's when you get to radicalization. That's when you get to the truly marginalized that I think eventually will present national security risk to us.
This is such an important issue. I wish we could spend much more time talking about it. Mark Green, USAID. Thank you.
Thank you.
A pro-life story is hitting the big screen. In an interview with EWTN's Pro-Life Weekly, actress Ashley Bratcher of Unplanned talks about how she prepares for the possible backlash that might come from the film.
Well, the first thing I told them was, I'm not scared. I have no fear going into this at all. I'm completely fearless because I know where I stand.
You can see more of Catherine Hadrow's interview tonight at 10 p.m. Eastern on EWTN. Up next, what Pope Francis says about martyrs and the media. And the Vatican is going to spend Christmas in the sand. We'll explain.
Oggi ne sono tanti. Curioso, non sono notizie.
Pope Francis says martyrs do not make the news. At his daily Mass at the Vatican, the Holy Father says God grows his church through prayer and silence and not headlines or grand events. President Trump plans to travel to California on Saturday to visit victims of the devastating wildfires. 56 people have died. The blaze destroyed the town of Paradise. It's not immediately clear if St. Thomas More Catholic Church survived. And many of the 800 families in the parish also don't know if their homes are still there. One survivor says, "We are people of hope and faith, and that's what we hold on to." For more on this story, visit National Catholic Register at ncregister.com. As you heard earlier in the broadcast, the U.S. Catholic bishops voted down a resolution to encourage the Vatican to release documents regarding disgraced Archbishop Theodore McCarrick. The 88-year-old is accused of sexual abuse of children and seminarians. They debated the measure for half an hour. 83 voted in favor, 137 were against it. In July, McCarrick resigned from the College of Cardinals. He's living in a monastery in Kansas and is still an archbishop. Joining me now from Baltimore is Marjorie Murphy Campbell, founder of the Catherine Commission, a group of lay Catholics focused on the investigation of Archbishop Theodore McCarrick. Marjorie, welcome to our broadcast.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you for having me.
You're a canon lawyer. You've written open letters to the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, and your writings make it pretty clear that you are angry and frustrated with these bishops. Why?
The laity is crying out for information about how formerly Cardinal McCarrick rose to such a prominent position with our beloved American Catholic Church, while simultaneously abusing and harassing both what we now know to be a minor, settling at least two civil cases, and some long unaccounted for pattern of predatory behavior against our seminarians and young priests.
What do you think they should have done? Yesterday they had an opportunity to vote on whether or not they were going to ask the Holy See, ask the Vatican to release soon all of the documentation that they are able to, and they voted that down.
What the common thread I saw through the proceedings over the last 2 days was that any lay involvement was met with very purposeful and sometimes planned opposition.
Well, they're saying, in fairness to the bishops and to the Vatican is saying, hey, U.S. bishops, hold off until February. Why is that not acceptable to you?
Well, Cardinal DiNardo made very specific recommendations and promises to the laity with how he was planning to go forward. And they worked very hard as an executive committee to prepare for a vote the lay-led commission to investigate, to take and receive and investigate bishop complaints. And that was derailed on the eve of the meeting.
But what you're saying is you blame the Vatican here.
Well, I'm sure there's plenty of blame to go around, but I'm far more interested in finding results and answering questions and creating transparency than pointing fingers and blaming.
What would you like to see change?
Well, I think what we've seen over the last couple days is a brokenness in the collegiality of the Episcopal Conference, that there is a cultural problem within the conference, and it's probably a cultural problem that is directly related to how the former cardinal rose through the ranks with complete immunity for malfeasance and sexual misbehavior. And that cultural issue is an issue that the bishops themselves have to solve. And what I think needs to be done now is that the laity who rallied so effectively, so prayerfully, and so loyally to support our bishops' conference need to continue to support the bishops within the conference who are working on behalf of the American people and the victims of this former cardinal who was a sexual predator, and support them in all their efforts to change that Episcopal culture.
Marjorie Murphy Campbell, founder of the Catherine Commission. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Lauren.
And finally tonight, Christmas preparations are underway at the Vatican, and it's kind of a sand story. Yeah, the nativity scene at St. Peter's Square this year will be made of sand. Around 700 tons are being shipped to Rome. 4 artists, including one from the United States, will create the sculpture. It will be completed early next month. For all of you counting, 40 days until the birth of Jesus. Here at EWTN News Nightly, we want to thank you for joining us. Thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Let's keep in touch online. Follow me at Lauren Ashburn on Twitter and at Lauren Ashburn EWTN on Facebook. Good night and God bless you.